how a dancing plague killed hundreds in the sweltering summer of 1518 in the bustling medieval city of Strasbourg, within the Holy Roman Empire. Something extraordinary and terrifying began to unfold that would challenge everything physicians, theologians, and civic authorities believed they understood about human behavior, divine punishment, and the mysterious forces that could compel hundreds of people to dance themselves to death. This is the investigation into one of history's most bizarre and deadly mass hysteria events, the dancing plague of 1518, where ordinary citizens became trapped in an uncontrollable compulsion to dance for days, weeks, and sometimes months without rest, leading to exhaustion, heart failure, and death for dozens of victims who could not escape the rhythmic prison that had consumed their bodies and minds. Today, we explore the medical records, civic documents, and eyewitness accounts that reveal how an entire city descended into chaos as hundreds of people succumbed to a mysterious dancing mania that baffled doctors, terrified religious authorities, and created one of the most documented cases of mass psychogenic illness in human history. Our investigation begins on a hot July morning in 1518, when a woman known as Frau Trophia stepped into the narrow cobblestone streets of Strasbourg and began to dance with a frantic, desperate energy that would not cease, her feet moving to music that only she could hear, her body writhing and twisting in movements that seemed to come from some force beyond her control. Contemporary chronicles describe how Frau Trophia danced continuously for 6 days, her movements becoming increasingly violent and erratic as her body began to show signs of severe physical distress. Yet she remained unable to stop the compulsive motions that had taken possession of her limbs and mind. By the end of the first week, 34 more people had joined Frau Trophia in the streets, all exhibiting the same uncontrollable urge to dance, their bodies moving in wild, uncoordinated patterns that bore no resemblance to any known form of social or religious dancing practiced in medieval Europe. Medical records from the Strasbourg city archives describe how local physicians were completely baffled by the condition, initially attributing the dancing mania to hot blood and recommending that victims continue dancing to purge the corrupted humors that were believed to be causing their affliction. Acting on the medical advice of the time, city authorities constructed wooden stages in public squares and hired professional musicians to play continuous music, believing that organized dancing would help the victims dance out the mysterious illness that had infected their bodies and restore them to normal health. The civic records reveal how this well-intentioned intervention had catastrophic consequences, as the constant music and encouragement to continue dancing attracted even more people to join the frenzied crowds, swelling the number of dancers to over 400 individuals trapped in the same compulsive behavior. Eyewitness accounts describe scenes of absolute chaos as hundreds of people danced day and night in the city squares, their clothes torn and bloodied, their feet raw and bleeding, their faces contorted with exhaustion and terror as they remained unable to control their own movements despite obvious physical suffering. Contemporary medical texts describe how many of the dancers began to exhibit symptoms of severe physical distress, including rapid heartbeat, excessive sweating, difficulty breathing, and complete exhaustion. Yet they continued dancing as if driven by some external force that overrode their conscious will to stop. Church records from the period document how religious authorities initially interpreted the dancing plague as divine punishment for the sins of the community, leading to special masses, public prayers, and attempts at exorcism to drive out what they believed were demonic forces controlling the dancers' bodies. The chronicles of local monasteries describe how some dancers were brought to religious shrines and holy sites in desperate attempts to break the dancing compulsion through divine intervention. But many continued their frantic movements, even in the presence of sacred relics and religious ceremonies. Medical manuscripts from the period reveal how physicians began to recognize that their initial treatment recommendations had made the situation worse, leading to new theories about the dancing plague as a form of collective madness that required isolation rather than encouragement. By August 1518, city records show that the authorities had completely reversed their approach, banning all public music, closing dance halls, and removing the public stages that had been constructed to help the dancers, recognizing that these measures had only intensified the epidemic. Contemporary accounts describe how many of the most severely affected dancers were transported to the shrine of Saint Vitus in the Vosges Mountains, where religious authorities attempted to break the dancing compulsion through prayer, fasting, and exposure to holy relics associated with protection against uncontrolled movement. The medical records indicate that while some dancers did recover after visiting religious shrines, many others continued their compulsive movements for weeks or months, with some dying from heart attacks, strokes, or complete physical exhaustion brought on by the continuous dancing. Civic death records from Strasbourg show that while the exact number of fatalities remains disputed, multiple contemporary sources confirm that dozens of people died as a direct result of the dancing plague, their bodies simply unable to sustain the continuous physical exertion demanded by their uncontrollable compulsion to move. Historical analysis reveals that the dancing plague of 1518 was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of dancing manias that affected various parts of Europe throughout the medieval and early modern periods, suggesting underlying social and psychological factors that made certain communities vulnerable to this type of mass hysteria. Medical historians have identified similar outbreaks of dancing mania in Germany, France, and the Low Countries throughout the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries, with each episode sharing common characteristics including sudden onset, contagious spread, and the inability of victims to control their compulsive dancing movements. Modern medical analysis suggests that the dancing plague of 1518 represents a classic example of mass psychogenic illness, where psychological stress and social conditions combined to create a shared delusion that manifested as uncontrollable physical symptoms affecting large numbers of people simultaneously. Contemporary research into the social conditions of early 16th century Strasbourg reveals a community under severe stress from famine, disease, and economic hardship, creating the psychological vulnerability that may have made residents susceptible to the type of collective hysteria represented by the dancing plague. The investigation into historical weather records shows that the summer of 1518 was marked by extreme heat and drought conditions that would have intensified food shortages and social tensions, creating an environment where mass psychological phenomena could spread rapidly through a stressed population. As we examine the medical records, civic documents, and eyewitness testimonies that chronicle the dancing plague of 1518, we discover how an entire medieval community became trapped in a collective nightmare where the simple act of rhythmic movement transformed from a source of joy and celebration into an uncontrollable compulsion that led hundreds of people into a deadly dance with forces they could neither understand nor escape, revealing the mysterious power of mass psychology to override individual will and transform ordinary human behavior into something extraordinary and terrifying.